What's up, you guys? We are here for another edition of Story Time, and today I'm talking about my 2016 trip around the U.S., my road trip around the U.S. So, let's see, where do I begin? Back in 2015, I left Baker McKenzie, the law firm I had been at for about seven or so years, and I joined Thomson Reuters. And more specifically, I joined Practical Law Company, which is a subsidiary of Thomson Reuters, and it's a work from home position, right? So I was working remotely, and I got that job, I want to say May 2015. So interesting enough, it just sort of fell in my lap. This recruiter from California reached out to me and was like, hey, this is a kind of a unique position. He emailed me, and cold. I'd never talked to him before. He's like, a unique position. They've interviewed 5 people for this position, and they still haven't found somebody they like, but your background being that you were a prosecutor for 2 years, and that you've had large law firm experience and some other experiences you've had, I think you might be a good fit. You know, it's kind of unique, but reach out and let me know what you think. So I waited about a week, reached out to him. Normally I just ignored, recruiter calls and stuff like that. But this one just something said, reach out to this guy. Turned out to be a phenomenal position with phenomenal pay, particularly for what they were asking for. So anyway, interviewed, got the job. So for the first couple of months, I sort of just was trying to learn the lay of the land, right? But then toward the summers when I started taking smaller trips. So I think that year in 2015, I went 3 places. I went to Cuba, I went to Cabo, and I went to Belize with a friend. Cuba and Cabo, I went by myself. Belize, I went with a friend. And all 3 of those trips, I worked. So I was really trying to test out the ability to work while I traveled, right? Because I had grand plans to really travel all over the place with this job. And I specifically had asked them when I was interviewing, so I can work anywhere, I can work anytime, right? Like, I don't have to be in Illinois. And they were like, yes, yes, yes. So I was like, cool. Everything's, looking great. So toward the end of the year 2015, December, I was starting to get that itch again to travel somewhere. But I had just come back from Belize a couple of weeks or like a month or so ago. And I was just feeling like it was like, I want to go somewhere, but I didn't really know where. And I was like, you know what? It feels like I can actually stretch this thing out a little bit more. And that's where I got the idea of doing a road trip. I've been wanting to do a road trip for a long time. I've been seeing these van life trip tours, and photos and social media posts on Instagram and stuff. And I was like, damn, that seems dope. It was just calling to me. So I decided I was going to leave right after Christmas. And my first stop was going to be Atlanta for New Year's. So oddly enough, as I'm planning this trip, I'm getting my bags and stuff together. Like, I want to say like the night before I was going to leave, it had been snowing in Chicago. And so I looked out at night late, like 2 a.m. I got up for something and I saw footsteps in the snow. Somebody had jumped my front gate, walked around in my yard, past my garage, up by my deck, and then jumped the gate toward the back. So I'm like, damn, like, that's not what you want to have in your mind when you're about to take a 5-month trip away from your house, right? Like, nobody there, like somebody scouting my place waiting to break in. So I was like, is this something that's telling me not to go, or is this something I just need to get past and trust that everything's going to be okay, right? You have those sort of forks in the road in life where you get to decide what you believe is in your future, right? And that sort of goes to the manifesting that I'm talking about in the course that I have, and also the video that I have. If you haven't checked out my manifesting video, is what you believe is sort of what you will experience. And I decided right there that I was not going to succumb to fear. I was not going to allow this experience to dictate what was going to happen for me in the next year, which I plan to have this tremendous experience, right? So I decided I was going, and I wasn't going to have any issues with my house. And I took off on my trip, and that was the end of that. And I sort of had this feeling, right, that this was a trip about self-discovery. And I just felt like it needed to be an exploration of what I felt more so than what I'd been thinking, because we tend to think a lot more than we feel, and we can tell ourselves all sorts of things and get into our heads a lot, but your feelings can mislead you depending on where they're coming from. But in terms of like feeling and from an intuitive standpoint, not just emotionally, I mean from an intuitive standpoint, right? So what I was doing was trying to design, I guess, a scenario where I would force myself to feel as I go, to rely on my intuition as I sort of traveled and traversed these different experiences. And so I'm driving through Indiana and something just said, turn the radio off. And I turned the radio off for the rest of the trip. And I just listened to myself, and I just processed things that, you know, sometimes things come up in your head, but you don't have the time, the space to give them the attention they need. And I wanted to give myself the time and attention. And so I just sort of thought and processed and visualized and worked through old things that were in my head as I drove across the country, right? So I get to Atlanta, and I first stayed with an old buddy, John. And John is someone I met back in 1997 in New Jersey when I was doing a co-op with Johnson & Johnson. So my junior year at Hampton, I got a co-op position with J&J, and so I didn't go to school that spring semester. Worked up in Titusville, New Jersey at Janssen Pharmaceutica, and that's where I met John and some other people from Hampton who were working up in the area. And so he and I have been cool. He ended up going to law school. He was actually studying for law school at the time. And so I called him a couple times and asked him questions when I was going through the process of looking to go into law school and stuff like that. So he and his family live in Atlanta. Stayed with them for about a week. Finally met his son, Deuce. I had never met him, his wife, Ashanti. And coincidentally, his mother-in-law and sister-in-law, Ashanti's mother and sister, were there visiting for like a day or two. We had overlap. They have a big house down there in Cobb County. And what was so interesting is that I don't know how we got on the subject, but they started talking about some weird experiences they had when they were living in the Northwest. I think they were in Washington State. And for anybody who's in sort of to UFO or you know, alien sort of study, the Northwest is a hotbed. You know, Washington, British Columbia, it's just a hotbed for alien activity, right? And abductions particularly. And they started telling this story about them living in this house and how they didn't say they were abducted or that they had alien visitors, but you could tell when they were talking that they couldn't give a logical explanation for what they were feeling, what they experienced, time gaps, physical manifestations of things, and the amount of fear they had about staying up there. And they were like, we had to leave. And they moved literally as far as they could away from the Northwest. And just talking to them about their experiences and seeing the visceral reaction and like I hate to say it, but the fear and dread of those experiences was eye-opening for me, because I'd never talked to somebody who had been, in my mind, abducted before, right? I'd heard stories, I read stories, seen movies, but I never had a conversation with somebody who was talking about it, but not willing to say, yes, we've been abducted, but they were talking all around it. Fascinating. So I stayed with John in for a week. We kicked it around Atlanta, and I have some family down there, so I hooked up with my Aunt Lorraine and my cousins Beverly and Lori, stayed with them for a day or two, ended up cooking some gumbo with them and going to Saints Falcons game, which was incredible. We tailgated outside the stadium, then went inside and enjoyed the game, had great seats. Really, really good time catching up with family and talking about a lot of stuff and learning things about family that I didn't know. You know, we just don't have that time to sit with somebody for that long of a period of time. You know, you visit people, you see people sort of in passing with a whole lot of people around, but to sit with people in a space for a controlled amount of time, you just get to open up and share some. So that was fantastic. From there, I went down to Jacksonville, Florida, and that is my old stomping grounds. I lived in Jacksonville back in 1998 into a little bit of 1999. So I was working with Johnson & Johnson, in their financial leadership development program, and that was my first rotation. We had 3 8th-month rotations that we did in that FLDP program. Jacksonville was my first. So I used to work at VistaCon down there. So I went by my old apartment in Paradise Island off of Southside Boulevard, and then I drove by a couple of the places I used to go play pool and drink, and I didn't know anybody down there, so I would just go out and meet people, and I still have friends today that I talk to that I met when I was down there for that 8 months. And it was a cool experience to be down there. Hooked up with one of my uncle's friends that I knew growing up, Kenny, and spent a couple days down there, and then headed down south to Miami. So got down to Miami, ended up spending like a week there. While I was down in Miami, I just did some things I wanted to do, just kind of explored Miami in a way that I never had, because I'd never gone down there by myself. I'd been to Miami a ton of times, but it was always for like a boys trip or a bachelor party or, something like that. So it was always me with a lot of people, kicking it, agreeing on what we're going to do, but having a great time. But I was down there by myself. I'm on this trip by myself. I'm feeling into what I want to do. I'm sort of exploring what comes out of me. I also hooked up with a couple law school buddies. So first I went and drove up for an evening with my buddy Blake up in Fort Lauderdale. He's an attorney down there, and we went to dinner at a steakhouse, chilled, just caught up, and then as I was leaving Miami, I stopped up, I think it's near West Palm, and hooked up with a buddy from law school, Anya, and met her family, her kids and her husband. Stayed, had dinner with them, and then I went to Orlando and then started making my way west. So I ended up stopping couple times. I spent the night, I think, somewhere in the Panhandle, after I spent the night in Orlando, because it was late that night, and then drove through Alabama, Mississippi, all through that area that I'd never really been into, and then I arrived into New Orleans and spent a week in New Orleans, which was phenomenal. I love New Orleans. What a great city, right? I've been there before a couple times. Back in 2010, I was down there for a National Bar Association conference, lawyers conference. I got an award, top 40 under 40. And I think I'd been down there another time before. So I knew New Orleans a little bit, had been down there, but this time again, I'm by myself for a while. Ended up figuring out that I was going to coincide with one of my favorite cousins, Thaisa, was coming down there with her husband and her mother to go to a wedding. So we end up kicking it, hanging out. Of course, I came prepared. I had a suit, so I ended up crashing, going to the wedding with them. And you know me, right? So I ended up catching the garter belt. I'm all up in the wedding photos. Don't even know these people. I'm in the wedding photos. I'm having a great time. It was really a good time. Went down to Frenchman Street, listening to some live music. One of Marcella's boys was playing over there one day, so we enjoyed that, man. I just really had a good time in New Orleans, eating good food. And I wasn't vegan at the time, so I was eating some of everything. Had a really good time, po' boys and you name it, I ate it. And so from there, I left New Orleans, and the next stop was Houston, Texas. So I stayed in Houston for about 3 days, I think. Hooked up with a buddy I hadn't seen in over 20 years. One of my buddies from grade school, Joe Stefanelli. Real cool cat, man. We hooked up, had some drinks. I hooked up with one of our other law school buddies, Matt, and his wife, and went out with them once or twice. And then from there, I went up to Dallas and stayed a couple days exploring Dallas. I don't think I'd ever been to Dallas. So that was cool, just to sort of see the city. Ended up hanging out with a girl I met when I was in Cuba. I'll tell that story, the Cuba story. But anyway, incidentally, I met this black girl from Southern California while I was out in Cuba. We ended up kicking it while we were down there, and some of her friends came down for her birthday, so I kicked it with them while I was down there. Really good time. But anyway, hooked up with her in Dallas, met some of her friends who were out there. One of her friends from LA had flown in to kick it with her, so I just had a good time. Had a nice Airbnbs up there in Dallas, and from there went down south to Killeen, hooked up with my cousin Larice and her family, stayed with them just for a couple hours. No, for one day. For one day I stayed with them. I slept overnight, and then I left the next day. Went down to Austin, stayed in Austin for like a week. So Austin's where things changed a little bit for the trip, right? So I was in Austin for the whole week, kicking it by myself, going to bars, listening to live music, and end up stopping in this spot where DJ was in there. I don't know how I ended up in the DJ booth with him. He's showing me how to mix and shit. I'm behind the tables it was just a good time, right? And I'm working along the whole way, right, in this trip. So like, I'm going to Starbucks, I'm working in coffee shops, I'm working everywhere, in my hotel room sometime, but I'm working this whole time I'm on this trip. And so Austin's known for some famous barbecue, right? So I'd heard that there's this one really, really good place. So I had stopped, but the line was literally around the block. I was like, I'm not doing it. And one of the people in line was like, actually, there's a place that's probably just a notch below this. That's down the street. It's a trailer. They always park there. You can go there and get some barbecue. Because I was planning to actually drive down to San Antonio that day. I was just getting lunch. I packed up my bags and I was about to get out of there to go down to stay with my buddy Keith, who I met and befriended at Hampton, right? Cat from the South Side of Chicago. So I go get some barbecue and I was like, I'm not going to eat it here because the tables were kind of packed. It's just funny how things happen. So I put the barbecue on the floor of my car and I'm like, I'm going to go eat it somewhere else before I drive off. And I'm driving down this hill and I'm coming to go through this light, and it's a guy sitting at the light waiting to make a left turn in front of me to get onto the highway. And I'm coming and he's waiting. And then right as I come to the intersection, he turns in front of me and I blast him. Airbags deploy. I'm like, after the collision, I'm like, did I just get in a crash? Like, are you serious right now? And I look to my left and there's people looking at me and I'm sitting there. And I didn't feel like I was hurt, but I was a little stunned. I think the airbag sort of, might have concussed me a little bit. But I stare at him because I can see him and he's got a girl in the car. I'm thinking to myself, right? And so I end up getting out. Paramedics come, police come, they start interviewing, asking questions, and my car's totaled. Like, I could just tell it's totaled. So I'm pissed, right? Like, I'm like, okay, is the trip over now, right? Is that it? Is that a wrap? So they take me to the hospital in an ambulance. I'm in there because they're like, you probably should get checked out, airbags. They thought I was a little bit, not loopy, but they were like, you're fine, but we just precautions, right? Your airbag, all that stuff, you probably should get checked out. So I go to the hospital and I call Keith. I'm like, yo, bro, I'm not going to make it down today. Just got into a car accident, probably totaled my car. Like, I'm just going to grab an Airbnb, figure out what's going on here, and then figure out what I'm going to do in terms of this trip. If I'm going to rent a car and keep going, or whether I'm just going to fly back to the Chi and cut my losses. So about an hour and something after that, I'm still waiting for tests and stuff. Keith rolls up into my room, right? So I guess it's about an hour and something drive from San Antonio up to Austin, but he just drives up on his own and comes in. And that was really cool, right? So we ended up, I go grab a couple things out of my car, jump in his car, and we drive down to San Antonio and end up staying with him for about a week while I sort of process what I was going to do, right? I decompressed from the accident and ended up talking to my insurance company. They were like, they were going to give me like a $19 a day rate or something, really cheap. The first 60 days or something like that, or a month was going to be free under my coverage, and it was going to be really, really cheap after that. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna keep going on the journey. And I had a private Facebook group with like 80 or so people in it that I had been sort of writing and journaling my journey along the way in it. And so I told them, I was like, yo, I got in a car accident, like, I don't know if I'm gonna do it. They were like, no, you got to keep going. First of all, we love the stories you write, and you got to keep doing. You're doing this for more than just you, right? Like, you got to keep going on the trip. So that did sort of influence my decision to rent the car and to keep going. So hung out with Keith and them, with the family, Aiden and Lauren with his kids and his wife Kenjada, and just, had a good time with them. He's like my brother, so it's like being with family. So we just kicked it. I ended up renting this Toyota Corolla. That's what they gave me, right, in terms of the rental car. So I had to drive back to Austin, get the rest of my stuff out of the trunk that was in there in the car from the wrecking yard, and then I headed out further west. So my next stop was going to be Phoenix, to stay in the Phoenix area with my cousin Teddy, but that's a long ass drive. So I ended up stopping in El Paso for the night to sleep. booked a one night. Normally I'm like doing Airbnbs where I like have the whole apartment to myself, right? Once or twice I did like a room where I was only gonna be there for like a night, and where inventory was low on a condo. So same thing was going on in El Paso. Not a lot of inventory, and the woman on there, her face she looked like she was a kind person. I didn't have to worry about, getting murdered or nothing. So I booked a private room. I go there and she's got kids, but the kids are gone. And she's like, yo, I think it might have been Thursday. She's like, every Thursday I go to karaoke with my friends and we go sing. She's like, you got to come with us. I was like, okay. I didn't plan on going out, but you know what? I'll go. And I don't think nobody else is going to be at the house. So I probably think she didn't want me there by myself at her crib, just chilling. So I go with them. We go singing karaoke, drinking with her friends. We come back. She makes breakfast. Then I go to sleep. She goes to sleep. I wake up, and I guess her boyfriend had come back in the middle of the night. He's a bouncer or something. And he was sitting in the chair waiting for me in the morning, I guess, to make sure I ain't stealing none on my way out. But he was funny. I ended up giving her some coaching on that situation, because apparently he moved in from his mother's garage into her place. And I was like, bruh, baby, you could do better than him. You could do bad all by yourself. So anyway, left El Paso and went up to Phoenix. Gilbert is actually where she lives. So I stayed in Gilbert for about 7 days, working out of Starbucks, had lunch with my cousin Teddy and her partner Ron, and just spent some time getting to know them, right? Like I knew Ron was an accountant. I knew a little bit about him. I met him once or twice, but I didn't know he, was a pilot, had his own plane, a Bonanza. So we talked about that, and he's a motorcycle guy and a Porsche guy. So we talked about that, and, just a really chill time, really good time. And, I enjoyed it. That was my first time in the Phoenix area. So met up with one of my friends, Erica from St. Louis, I knew back when I was in law school. So we went out and kicked it one night. Just a real chill experience in Phoenix. From there, I headed west. I was on my way to San Diego, but in right between San Diego and Phoenix, right on the border of Mexico and I guess that would be far east California. My buddy Tahir, also from Hampton, also from Chicago, was out there with his family. He was U.S. Border Patrol at the time. And so they were staying right there on the border, and I stopped in with them for a couple hours before heading over to San Diego. That was a cool time, hung out with his sons. We went and grabbed something to eat, and then I headed out and stayed in San Diego for about a week, just explored. Now, I had been to San Diego before. I had a case out there. I want to say it was like 2009 or 2010 maybe. But I had a vehicular homicide case that I was doing with a partner out from the San Diego office. And, since I had a lot of trial experience, he needed somebody who was going to be cheaper than another partner and somebody to second chair the trial and help him. He was doing a favor for one of their clients. And so I was out there for like a month and a half in San Diego for this trial. Really cool experience. Had a chance to really get to know San Diego. So this is like almost coming back and being able to revisit some of the places I had kicked it in and had fun with. And it was just a cool time seeing parts of San Diego I hadn't seen before. And it was good. So from San Diego, went up to LA. Now, LA is where I spent the majority of my time. I ended up spending like almost 2.5 months in LA. And I stayed with my friend Thaisa, who's another person from Hampton. I also worked at J&J with her. And she had a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. She was like, yo, come stay as long as you want. She was trying to figure out what her next move was going to be. So we talked about a lot of things, some stuff that had been going on in her life, but it was chill because she had a Starbucks 2 blocks from her house and another dope coffee shop over on Pico. And so I was able to just walk to either one depending on how I felt and work from there. And we went hiking and, went out and ate and went to the movies and just hung out. We had hung out before. Good buddy of mine, and had a really good time. And she ended up allowing me to use that sort of like as my home base for a couple different trips in California that I took without leaving. So from there, well, let me stop, because based on that car accident I was in Austin, and based on the amount of miles I had driven over the last 2.5 months, coming from Chicago all the way to LA, my back was tight, right? So she was telling me she had been in a car accident Tiana was telling me she'd been in a car accident like a year and a half ago, ended up getting put in touch with this intuitive chiropractor, Sally Kleinbart, and how amazing she is, how she sort of helped her with her back and how therapeutic it was. And I was like, bet, I'm gonna book a session with her. So I did, and went and talked to her first about what it was she did, and had a session. It was cool. So from there I ended up going to San Francisco for a week. But on my way up, I stopped in the Carmel Valley, Big Sur area. So I explored Carmel and Big Sur for about 3 or 4 days. Beautiful, my God, it's almost like a foreign landscape out there. I mean, that famous bridge, right? How beautiful that landscape is. And I'm, met this guy who's got these bunnies on his head and he's playing the guitar. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? Ate at amazing restaurants and talked to people, learned about Esalen Institute, really sort of a metaphysical, esoteric type place where they sort of, teach and hold community there. So that was interesting to learn about them, and just had a fantastic time. So then headed up to San Fran for about a week, stayed with my friend Michelle, who I knew from Chicago. She had left her job at McDonald's and moved out west. She's from there, from Cali, and stayed with her, and we explored. She loves food, so we were going to different restaurants. Ended up going to a Warriors game over in Oakland. Really just had a good time, all the little local spots around her house, eating good food and catching up. Hadn't talked to her. She was in the process of transitioning, looking at changing jobs. So we, talked about that a lot, and dealing with some issues she had at her job. So that was chill. And ended up coming back to LA, back to Tiana's, got some things together, stayed for a while, and then met some friends in Tahoe, Black Ski Weekend. So what I had to do is I had to take the Corolla and trade it in for a 4Runner, because you have to have 4-wheel drive to get up to Tahoe because of elevation, because of the snow on the roads, all that stuff, right? So I ended up getting this 4Runner, which I had for the rest of the trip. And so I head up to Tahoe for about a week in total, and we kicked it. I had been skiing before in Germany years and years ago, but I had never taken a lesson. So I took a lesson just to get some fundamentals down, and enjoyed my time skiing in Tahoe. And they had parties, and we kicked it, and we had a townhouse. So it was like 8 or 9 of us in this big townhouse. So we had all kind of crazy conversation. We cooked meals together, we fellowship, we laughed, we talked shit. It was just a really good time. Went snowmobiling. I mean, you name it. We did all sorts of things, and I got a chance to meet some people, that I didn't know, and it was really a good time. It was really, really a good time. I enjoyed that tremendously. And on the way back to LA, I stopped in Yosemite. So I had never been to Yosemite, walked around. I only did a day in Yosemite, but I really, the scenery is amazing. The landscape was amazing. Man, Yosemite was dope. Like, that's someplace I could definitely see myself going back to and spending a couple days, like just out there in the wilderness hiking, maybe just with a sleeping bag and a tent. Like, it was just really a cool place. So came back to LA for a while, ended up staying over at another friend's house over by Loyola Marymount for about a week or so. She was going out of town, so she let me crash at her place for a while. And then my friend Jean was having a birthday party. I think it was her 40th. I think it might have been her 40th or her 45th, one of the two, in Vegas. So I drove out to Vegas, and she ended up renting like a whale suite. Had like 40 people come out there, and it was a really good time. She had things planned. We kicked it. We partied. Just a real cool time. And yeah, that was dope. And I had planned to do sort of a lap, right? So I had planned to go down the same route I had taken over to LA, but I was planning to come through and do like some of the national parks like Yellowstone, come up the northern route. But my job call was like, yo, we need you to come be sort of the representative in Chicago at this lawyers conference. So I was going to have to fly back just because of timing. But before I wrap it up, something interesting really did happen after I left Tahoe. So I took this nasty spill when I was in Tahoe, where my legs end up like splitting nasty, and I think I tore some muscle in my inner right thigh. But I was kind of banged up from the fall because I was like tumbling hell over feet down this mountain. So when I get back, I called Sally. I was like, "Yo, Sally, I have to get another session. Like, my body's all broke up. Like, I need you to work some magic on me, baby." She was like, come on, I can fit you in, right? So she's in there working on me, and we started talking about some stuff a little deeper, right? Because now we kind of know each other a little bit. So we started talking about metaphysics and our respective life journeys and everything. And she's like, man, I didn't know, you were into all this and me, da-da-da. She's like, you got to go talk to my friend Kit. So I'm like, Kit, like, who is this guy? He's like, well, he's like an astrologer. He's like a psychic. He's a real metaphysical guy, like really cool. Like he's like a life advisor for me. Like, she's like, I've been talking to him for years, and he's really helped me sort of, figure out my way and a lot of things. So I was like, fuck it, I'll go, get a session with him. So she set it up, gave me his number. I called him, had to go to his house, and we sat outside. He set up this recording machine on the CD, and we sit down. I didn't have many expectations, but it was probably one of the most remarkable experiences of my life. And I've had a couple, but he just started to tell me about myself and my life in a way that validated so many things that I had been through, that I had experienced, and that I knew to be true. I felt to be true, but I didn't know. And he just confirmed a lot of things. And I mean, this guy had worked for some of the greats, right? He worked for John Lennon and Yoko Ono. He worked for Jimi Hendrix. He worked for Tina Turner. He worked for Lady Diana. He worked for the backup dancers for Ike and Tina. And he was telling me how Ike was just he was a non-discriminatory ass beater. He used to beat the backup singers' asses as well as Tina Turner, right? Just amazing, some of the stuff he told me, and the life experience he's had, and the insight that he had, that he shared with me, that helped me see so many things about my path, my journey, what I was doing, what I've been feeling. And it was a really remarkable experience. And that experience is what really catapulted me into sort of the deep dive that I began taking when I got back to Chicago. So it felt like that road trip was sort of the reintroduction to intuition and sort of self-realization that I've been feeling called to do for a while. Like, I've had intuitive experiences all my life. I've always been I can know things, I see things pretty clearly, but I felt like I needed to get closer to that. And so this trip was helping me. Like, all along the trip, I was like, I wouldn't plan that much. I would ask in the moment, what should I do? Should I take a left here? Should I take a right here? Should I go this place? Should I not? And I was looking for feedback from somewhere inside my body, headspace. I was learning a new way of communicating is really what it was. I was honing a new way of communicating. That's what that trip sort of was. And the Kit experience sort of was the icing on top to push me over the edge. So when I got back to Chicago, I took a deep dive into like just intuitive development and altered states of consciousness, and it just was falling into my lap, like videos, books, and it ended up prepping me to want to go down to Peru to get into some plant medicine. And that is a story that I will actually do another story time on. So that is the story of my 2016 road trip around the US. Hope it was good, hope it was interesting, and I'll tell you another story next time. All right.